The biggest lie the music industry ever told. Documentary. Hello Yassine dropped this a day ago. It's an hour and 41 minutes. I'm gonna try not to pause that much. I'm gonna talk through the video. Get right into it. The link to this video will be in the description. But I'm not gonna lie, if you're watching this whole video, first off, thanks for watching. Second off, might as well sub.
You finally went viral. You go to bed, you wake up, it's over, and it was completely out of your control. You're an artist that's gotten really good at your craft. Your music is great, and you've been doing everything in your power to try and get more attention. Your record label tells you that you need to make content, especially on TikTok. After all, that's where everything is taking off now. So you heed their advice and you make a ton of content, and then one day
I gotta go crazy on a TikTok.
Is going viral on Chinese TikTok. You look at the chart of creates, and over 180,000 people made a TikTok with your video that day, and you got over 1.8 million streams on the song on just one platform.
Yeah!
You're excited. Your team is reaching out, scheduling
we going
meetings
crazy.
on TikTok in 2 days. You go to sleep happy. Your dream is finally being realized. Until you wake up, look at the news, and your stomach drops. The worst news of your career. UMG is going to remove all of their music from TikTok, and you're one of them. That is
Oh, GG, bro. I'm cooked.
the exact scenario
I just went crazy. I had 1.8 million people going crazy with my sound on TikTok, and now it's getting removed.
that happened to musician Cody Fry.
I just gotta tell somebody what's going on right now. So I currently have a song going super viral in China. Here are the Shazam charts for China. This is my song, Things You Said. It's number one.
That's tough.
Data. Yesterday, 769,000 TikTok creations in a day.
700
streams in a day. It's crazy. So I'm feeling incredible. This is like everything you hope for as an artist. But as I was laying down to sleep last night, that's right, I am a Universal Music artist. As I'm recording this, Universal hasn't pulled.
That's insane.
Yet, but if they do, those TikTok creations that were more than doubling every single day, those are gonna go to zero. It's just hard as a hardworking artist to see a budding viral trend with one of your songs that's really awesome in its infancy just like get crushed by multi-billion-dollar corporations.
On January 30th, 2024, Universal Music Group officially waged public war on TikTok with an announcement that they would be removing any and every song on the platform from anyone signed to any label or division of UMG.
Whoa.
This caused a tidal wave of press, both positive and negative, but nobody covered the fact that only 3 months later, on May 1st, they made an announcement that they had come to a new licensing agreement and everything would continue as it had before for the artists and creators, with the music being restored and allowed on TikTok. But why did it ever happen in the first place? Why were certain top artists allowed to keep their music on TikTok? Was it beyond just business and even diving into politics? And how did this 3-month UMG blackout on TikTok affect creators and the artists under the UMG umbrella? I dove deep to uncover proof that nothing that UMG said was true, and the truth is a lot darker.
The Push and Pull, Chapter 1. UMG's deal with TikTok. Introduction to UMG and
the frustration that UMG had with TikTok stems back years, from the initial deal that they signed back in 2021. At this point in time, TikTok was coming off the back of the global success that Lil Nas X became with Old Town Road, and how that directly came from TikTok.
He was going. I remember he was going crazy.
Songs like Arizona Zervis Roxanne that became one of the TikTok hits to chart and debut in the top 40 of the Hot 100 by an independent artist. Keep in mind that this was still in late 2019, so the effects of TikTok virality had compounded, and record companies were definitely in negotiations with TikTok at that time to finally land the deal that they would announce in February of 2021. This deal was a licensing deal. To put it simply, any business needs a license to play music that is owned by a particular company. What a lot of platforms do is that they just let the users do what they will, and then if they're issued a DMCA, which is a copyright takedown, they remove it, until they get big enough that they negotiate a deal with the record labels. This is
how most stuff is. If you react to music, most of your stuff will most likely get it'll get copyrighted. It won't get struck. It'll get claimed instead, where they'll take the royalties for it. But there's some stuff where it'll get blocked all out, and you have to like edit it and stuff for it to be able to get posted. But if you are getting claimed, I'm pretty sure the music label could come and still DMCA your stuff.
This is the same thing that happened with YouTube. In this case, the major labels had signed buyout agreements with TikTok. These deals involve a lump sum payment from TikTok for using licensed music for a fixed period of 3 years, in this case with UMG from 2021 to 2024, typically for short video content. All TikToks at that time were under 60 seconds. So the record label saw it as getting free money to a degree, paid for somewhat of a trailer of the music so the user could go listen to it on Spotify or another streaming platform. But while initially seen as beneficial, there became a growing concern when they saw how much money TikTok was making and believed music was the driver of this. It wasn't even a year later, however, that UMG began to feel like they deserved more money and that TikTok had gotten the better end of the deal. This was in part due to the explosive growth of TikTok. If we're to take a look at the revenue for 2020, which is
at a
likely
point,
when they finalized the
UMG
deal
was
before
having their music on
announcing it in
TikTok
Q1
and
of
they weren't getting paid
2021,
for it.
It was $2.6 billion. And by 2022, it had grown to $9.6 billion. Whilst the revenue
we need some of that.
the music industry was receiving from advertising didn't grow in proportion.
We need
to
some of that.
UMG's primary grievance was the compensation TikTok offered for using their music. Despite TikTok's massive user base, the platform proposed paying artists at a rate significantly lower than other social media platforms. UMG pointed out that TikTok contributed only 1% to their revenue, which was disproportionate given what they believed was the platform's reliance on music to drive engagement. UMG and a growing group of people in the music industry were upset with this and believed they needed to strike a revenue share deal with TikTok as soon as possible so they could get a piece of the pie.
I'm making 1% of my revenue from it, but y'all are making $9.6 billion off of my music.
The owner of UMG and chairman, said in reference to the 20 years prior of platforms like MTV, YouTube, and now TikTok, we were given a lot of reasons why our artists shouldn't get paid. People said, it's great promotion, or you can use it as a platform for discovering new artists. And then technology platforms were built on the backs of the artists' hard work and those who invested in artists early in their careers with very little return. Negotiations between UMG and TikTok were littered with challenges. UMG accused TikTok of employing unfair tactics to coerce them into accepting a less favorable deal. TikTok allegedly deboosted music from developing artists while retaining music from global stars to pressure UMG into conceding. This was seen as a clear attempt to intimidate UMG into accepting a deal that undervalued their music. UMG wanted TikTok to give visibility to their new signees. Their music was not yet recognized by the masses like their old artists, who UMG spent millions of dollars making famous before TikTok even existed.
Okay.
In October of 2022,
is that what their deal was for then?
Reported the rapid growth of short-form video companies, thanks to music on their
push their new artists,
is going to become a problem if the money paid by these platforms to artists doesn't start fairly reflecting their own revenue growth. The Universal boss, in reference to Lucian Grange, raised concerns that just as the music industry has seen significant progress in narrowing the value gap on services like YouTube, another gap is now forming fast in the new iterations of short-form video. These were already alarm bells ringing within TikTok that UMG would be tough to negotiate with for their next licensing term, and advertising revenue, as we would come to find out, was not something they were interested in giving up, for good reason. All three major record labels, Sony, Warner, and Universal, were asking for advertising revenue share from TikTok for their new licensing deal negotiations, and during that time,
we need a piece of this pie. We all need to eat off of that.
Reflecting on 2022, it's clear that artist success travels to our platforms, with 13 out of 14 Billboard Hot 100 number ones supported by viral trends on TikTok. Our platform continues to unlock real-world opportunities for artists and labels, with a brilliantly engaged community who love to build connections with artists and their music, and the impact of that is undeniable. This was such an important statistic because of what it said silently. Without TikTok, good luck even trying to get a chart-topping hit, which is far different from what the record companies they were negotiating with were trying to do, which was diminish the effect that TikTok had on turning new songs into hits.
Yeah, it's too late. It's already happened.
Quietly launched in early 2023 is what set UMG and others into a frenzy. They quietly removed the ability to access the music library of major record labels for users in Australia and New Zealand, which led to some outlets reaching out to TikTok for comment, where they said some
that's
of our
a big
community
group
in
of people.
Australia will not be able to access our full TikTok sounds library
Australia
at
and
the
New
moment.
Zealand?
This will only affect certain music and is scheduled work while we analyze how sounds are accessed
Certain
and added
music.
to videos, as well as looking to improve and enhance the wider sounds library. We appreciate it's disappointing if a certain track is unavailable or if a sound is muted on a previous video. This change will not be in place for long, and not all music is affected. We look forward to restoring our full catalog soon. This was indicative of the state of negotiations. They had reached a point to where TikTok was considering an option of potentially having to remove catalogs of music from their platform and to assess their decision on whether or not to proceed with giving up advertising revenue or other concessions. They wanted to calculate what effect it would have on their users if this were to pan out, which is one of two results. One, user engagement drops off when major label music is removed. TikTok realizes that it needs their music to keep its user base on the platform. Or two, user engagement stays the same, or unlikely, even grows during the test phase. TikTok would have proven that it doesn't need major label content to run a successful platform.
Did one or two happen?
Several months later, now in May of 2023, the global head of music at TikTok was interviewed and asked about the experiment, where he danced around with his answer, not saying there was a particular objective or whether it was a success or failure, and that the intention was to just investigate user behavior when they run into situations
They were just
like
testing.
a song
They didn't
content,
even really
amongst
care.
other things. The follow-up question was about what would happen if they had to remove certain catalogs of music from TikTok's library. If we were forced to take down a catalog or part of a catalog, we're pretty confident that we could still remain a compelling service for our users. The guiding principle is we get fully relicensed with every single music rights holder out for any song on TikTok. But we also think about if we were put in a position where we had to take down a catalog or a partial catalog, how do we still make the user experience compelling enough for our creators and users?
Initial decision to
Olbermann
pull
wasn't
out.
lying, because this would lead up to the announcement Universal Music Group made in January of this year, which was a last-ditch Hail Mary attempt at getting the terms they wanted, with the headline, "An Open Letter to the Artist and Songwriter Community, Why We Must Call Timeout on TikTok." UMG took the approach that TikTok was this big bad corporation that was refusing to pay artists their, quote, fair share. Today, as an indication of how little TikTok compensates artists and songwriters, despite its massive and growing user base, rapidly rising advertising revenue, and increasing reliance on music-based content, TikTok accounts for only about 1% of our total revenue. Ultimately, TikTok is trying to build a music-based business without paying fair value for the music. On top of this, UMG followed up with fear-mongering that TikTok's promotion and use of AI-generated music would dilute royalties for human artists, which is as ridiculous of a notion that new artists would dilute old artist royalties. UMG would even go on to talk about bullying and harassment as if they wanted to protect TikTok users, which has nothing to do with their business dealings with the platform, but could be indicative of other things which we'll get into later. TikTok makes little effort to deal with the vast amounts of content on its platform that infringe our artists' music, and it has offered no meaningful solutions to the rising tide of content adjacency issues, let alone the tidal wave of hate speech, bigotry, bullying, and harassment on the platform. They would even vaguely address the experiment TikTok ran in Oceania and claim that TikTok was deboosting newer artist sounds. By selectively removing the music of certain of our developing artists while keeping on the platform our audience driving global stars. TikTok would soon reply with a very short, simple, and concise statement. It's sad and disappointing that Universal Music Group has put their own greed above the interests of their artists and songwriters. Despite Universal's false narrative and rhetoric, the fact is they have chosen to walk away from the powerful support of a platform with well over 1 billion users that serves as a free and promotional discovery vehicle for their talent. TikTok has been able to reach artist-first agreements with every other label and publisher. Clearly, Universal's self-serving actions are not in the best interests of artists, songwriters, and fans. With the statement that UMG made, you would think that if there were any truth to it, UMG artists would be celebrating and supporting the decision made. But that wasn't the case. Publicly, it was mostly radio silence by the majority of artists. The first to speak out was Jack Antonoff, albeit backstage at the Grammys press room, producer for Taylor Swift, who had the following to say. You got a whole industry
What did he have to
like,
say?
you've got to do everything, and here's where you've got to do it. And then one day it's like, poof. There's a lot of things wrong in the industry, but I think it's as backwards, and at the very least we should have known. Several weeks later, the only artist to publicly support the decision was Kim Petras, who's most known for her hit single with Sam Smith, Unholy. I feel very protected by Universal. I know people who have #1 records and can't afford their rent, so I'm proud Universal is taking a stand. Of course, right now, all of us Universal artists are screwed a little bit, but you've got to take one for the team. The intentions are noble. It's about musicians making money from their art, and not just the famous faces, but the songwriters and the people behind the scenes. I feel like it's a really good fight.
Evidence UMG was lying.
Case, so immediately when this happened, I started investigating, poking around and asking many different questions surrounding this to get to the bottom of the effects that TikTok directly had on turning songs into hits. UMG themselves had multiple different teams working internally that were dedicated to trying to figure out TikTok and generating money from it, and these teams lasted for years. Some of these teams were also responsible in reigniting many old songs from UMG's catalog and breathing new life into them. One of the first artists that they worked on was a young man by the name of Trinidad Cardona. He had a song Dinero that was released in 2018 and wouldn't make much noise until 2021. This song would begin to get picked up on anime edits on TikTok, doing 32,000 streams a day on March 3rd, 2021.
I don't think I remember that, but I think I remember seeing
streams by March 25th.
Maybe.
By June 3rd, it was doing 250,000 streams a day. June 11th, it would enter the viral hits chart on Spotify, clocking 1.1 million daily.
Whoa! So within a month, it went from 30 to 250K daily, and then another month, actually another like week or two, it quadrupled in size again.
Streams, all the way up to 2 million daily streams on June 18th. At one point,
another week later, it doubled again.
His car in a Walmart parking lot after having already been signed to Island Records. Started working in food delivery while this was all growing, to hearing his song on the radio
2 million daily streams,
and then having the #1 trending song on TikTok. I can't play this video clip because it has his copyrighted song, but all of the resources can be found at helloyousseen.com/UMG versus TikTok. The link will be in the top of the comments. The internal team at UMG would discover certain metas, better described as the prevailing themes or trends that were most effective at spreading music on the platform.
They got
and
metas.
At the time, these started off with mashups.
They got music spreading
I reached
metas.
out to Tristan XO, who's a producer, DJ, and TikTok creator who became known for his slowed and sped up remixes of songs, breathing new life into many songs and turning them into modern day hits, most notably The Weeknd's Die For You.
Really took off. The sped up stuff is really what caught like everybody's attention across the board on TikTok. It felt like
the sped up stuff, caught everybody's attention
like
because everybody's
like
attention span started getting shorter.
There was a community for it, and there was like a lot of people who enjoyed it. But sped up felt like, oh shit, like now like the labels are noticing now, like it's just like everywhere. It wasn't just sort of like a niche thing. It kind of blew up. And
sped up stuff still be going crazy too,
like, to the point where sped up songs were getting like actually released through majors and getting like radio play. Like it was pretty insane.
Sped up isn't the beast it once was anymore, since so many people have become accustomed to it. It's become more of a staple now.
Yeah.
What's bizarre is that several artists were able to stay up on TikTok during this ban, and it wasn't by accident. In early March, Ariana Grande released her album Eternal Sunshine, which was preceded by the single
Is she part of UMG?
Which went #1 on the Hot 100, as well as the follow-up single We Can't Be Friends that also went #1 on the Hot 100, thanks in part due to TikTok. These sounds were allowed to stay up, and a Variety article even noticed this, writing the following: the standoff between Universal Music Group and TikTok has resulted in a near complete blackout of all music owned, distributed, and published by the company. The videos are still there, but the music is muted. Yet new songs by UMG artists including Ariana Grande, Camila Cabello, and Niall Horan could be found on TikTok at the time of this article's publication. How and why is that happening? Reps for UMG and TikTok declined comment. Variety went on to give the benefit of the doubt, suggesting it may be poor copyright detection by TikTok or that UMG didn't know, but I wasn't convinced.
They got bots for that.
The first sign for me was the way Ariana Grande's album rollout was treated. They very obviously, Universal, they very obviously allowed UGC sounds to stay up on the app. They were not taking them down. The official sounds were not put up, but the UGC sounds were not getting taken down, and they were allowing them to stay up and allowing them to trend. And so that was my sort of first sign of like, okay, how legit is this UMG TikTok sort of feud and ban per se? Like, you know, how legit is this? Because Ariana Grande, one of their biggest artists, just released an album, and they're allowing her songs to stay up on the app.
To further break this down, there are two types of sounds on TikTok: UGC and PGC, standing for user-generated content and professionally generated content. An example of PGC would be a song that was distributed to all platforms and is available in the TikTok music library. The company that owns the rights to it put it on there. An example of UGC would be a sped-up version, a slowed version, or it could even be the actual song but with a different name, possibly the same name, but just uploaded directly to the sound from their phone as opposed to the professional channels. The problem is that if UMG truly believed that TikTok was benefiting from them more than they were benefiting from TikTok, then they would not have allowed viral UGC sounds of Ariana Grande, one of the biggest artists on their record label, to stay up for as long as they did. It would make sense if UGC sounds...
So, I guess the label isn't getting paid for
UMG artists went
people using UGC
but Ariana
sounds.
Grande,
And they
knew this was happening.
PGC
and the
stuff.
truth is, what most likely happened is the amount of pressure UMG received
the amount
from
of
Ariana
popularity
Grande and her
she was
team
getting
to allow
from
these sounds to stay
the
up
UGC,
because the team knows
they
how
just let it stay
valuable
up.
it is to their marketing plan and rollout. And they didn't want to upset one of their biggest artists that's driving a ton of their revenue.
Well, and that's why the Ariana Grande thing to me was the biggest like example of, you know, sort of how messed up things can be, because it's like there was a particular artist, I can't remember the name of the artist, but there was an artist who at the time of the Universal TikTok ban, he was a guy in his later 20s and he was signed to UMG, and he was like, I was having the best week of my life. Like I had worked in music and I had been trying to get my career to take off for, you know, years and years. And I finally got a song trending. And a week later it got muted, just gone. The moment, everything just gone.
That's tough.
And I was that, like you said, that's sort of the impact that it had on artists, because I think people saw UMG as like,
bro finally got his big break,
massive,
and then it got muted. Nobody can hear it anymore.
Nicki Minaj, Taylor Swift, you know, but the people who were really hurt by it were people like this guy who working their whole lives to get, you know, something trending, and now all of a sudden it's gone because of the label. And then for Universal to essentially just turn their head and look the other way when one of their big guns in Ariana Grande, you know, when she released the album, to sort of look the other way and allow things to trend, it was like, God, like that just sucks. Like, you know, there's this big artist who, you know, they probably made a lot of promises to, that they're allowing this to stay up because they know deep down the impact TikTok has. But this smaller artist who they, you know, maybe don't give the time of day to is now in this position that really just sucks, and there's nothing that they can really do about it.
That's tough.
That was like the big like juxtaposition for me, where I was like, God, like that just sucks. Like there has to be, like, something about this has to change. There's no way that this is allowed to just keep on the way it is, because it was very obvious that, you know, like I said, it was very obvious that they were looking the other way.
The artist Tristan was referencing here was Cody Fry. One point that does support UMG's claim for pulling out from their belief that TikTok was de-boosting some of their artists is that UGC sounds were heavily favored in the algorithm compared to PGC sounds, which was both supported as well as Tristan. If you can recall, what were the last PGC sounds that went viral? The Kid Leroy's Stay is one, which was well over 3 years ago, and there are probably a couple in between, but no smash hits. There was also another example that disproves UMG's claim that TikTok didn't turn songs into hits, and that was the success of The Weeknd's I Was Never There.
I mean, so the example that I can use is I Was Never There by The Weeknd. sort of a
Yeah, I was never there.
more of a deeper cut at the time back in, I believe, 2022. It was definitely more of a deeper cut Weeknd song that was really only listened to by probably his core fans, and which I was one of, and
Core fans.
why I knew about the song. And I posted that song, and it was doing, I believe, around 80,000 daily streams.
80,000.
I posted it. It went viral, and a bunch of other accounts, like, similar to mine, started posting it as well. And like, all the speed pages and slow pages, with, so many that just post music all the time, they started posting it. And I believe within 2 weeks after I posted, within 2 to 3 weeks after I posted it initially, it went from 80,000 daily
80,000 to
800,000.
Oh!
So it 10x the streams. And
We got
it's a
10x.
deeper cut Weeknd song, and then it was like, then you went to the Weeknd Spotify page, and it was like, Blinding Lights, Starboy, I Feel It Coming, and then it was like, I Was Never There, which was, like I said, a deeper cut Weeknd song is now essentially a hit song, a song that when played, a lot of people, at least, in the TikTok universe are going to be like, oh, like, I know what this song is. I know who it's by. I know the name of it. And, it eventually got to the point where it was doing over 1 million streams a day.
This was a song from his EP, My Dear Melancholy, in 2018, and now it has over.
So he's saying he posted
Spotify,
it,
blowing up over 4 years later, thanks to creators like Tristan and TikTok as a platform. This is clear evidence of how valuable TikTok is for music.
Oh,
TikTok
he went crazy on the promo.
Money from the streams that were generated due to that song's viral success on their platform, which is fair. But can you understand their gripe with UMG wanting revenue share from them now? UMG came around in less than 3 full months, announcing a licensing deal with TikTok. The joint agreement marks a new era of strategic collaboration between the two organizations, built on a shared commitment to help UMG's artists and songwriters.
I think the creators would have been getting the money from the
technology,
UGC,
marketing, and promotional
unless they were getting claimed.
UMG and TikTok will deliver improved remuneration for UMG songwriters and artists, new promotional and engagement opportunities for their recordings and songs, and industry-leading protections with respect to generative AI. If you read the statement, it was just saving face. They didn't announce that they would be receiving revenue share from advertisements or anything new. They didn't want to admit that they made an error and walked it back, giving TikTok all of the terms they wanted after removing their artist music from the platform for 3 months. After all, TikTok made it clear in January that they were able to renew their licensing deals with both Sony Music and Warner Music, the 2 other major labels. So it was UMG that was the problem here. Now we fully debunked the theory that UMG was doing this for monetary reasons. We'll give
TikTok got deals with WMG and Sony Music Group. I think it's SMG.
More evidence of that later on, but that leaves a potential political situation.
They're saying UMG's the problem. They got deals with the other ones. Chapter 2, the political landscape. TikTok struggle in the U.S. History of TikTok.
TikTok, from its inception, was facing heavy skepticism from the U.S. government.
That man Trump was talking about
from being a Chinese-owned company.
I'm gonna ban the TikTok app.
Attempts to either ban it or force Chinese company ByteDance to sell it to a U.S. company became a reality. Keep in mind, this all begins as a USA versus China situation, but it'll evolve into other countries being involved later down the line. The first little scuffle that TikTok ran into with the US government was this lawsuit that was filed in 2019 when it was still Musical.ly. Musical.ly was bought by ByteDance, which is the company that launched Douyin, Chinese TikTok, that would be spin-off into TikTok that was for foreign countries. So Douyin is Chinese TikTok. They don't really have TikTok, but it's
not gonna lie, I didn't know it got that.
TikTok is for every other country outside of China.
TikTok was originally Musical.ly, but I didn't know
Musical.ly
it was like
and
that.
Douyin. So this lawsuit was still for TikTok, and these were the claims. The complaint charges that defendants violated the COPPA rule and the FTC Act by failing to post a privacy policy on its online service, providing clear, understandable, and complete notice of its information practices, failing to provide direct notice of its information practices to parents, failing to obtain verifiable parental consent prior to collecting, using, and/or disclosing personal information from children, failing to delete personal information at the request of parents, and retaining personal information longer than reasonably necessary to fulfill the purpose for which the information was collected. TikTok agreed to pay a $5.7 million fine for this lawsuit, and that was the end of that. However, when politics began to cause trouble for TikTok's PR, when the protests in Hong Kong were happening in September of 2019 that were being posted all over Twitter, Instagram, and other social platforms, they were missing from TikTok. The Guardian was able to get a hold of internal documents that laid out the rules for what content should be removed or limited. For instance, the guidelines fell under content that was labeled a violation, which would cause it to be deleted from the platform altogether, potentially leading to a user ban, or visible to self, which was a lower tier offense that allows the content to stay up but severely limits its reach through the algorithm, more commonly known to us as a shadow ban. The guidelines they believe prevented Hong Kong protests from circulating would fall under hate speech and religion. A ban of criticism on China's socialist system, for instance, comes under a general ban of criticism/attack towards policies, social rules of any country, such as constitutional monarchy, parliamentary system, separation of powers, socialism system, etc. Another ban covers demonization or distortion of local or other countries' history, such as May 1998 riots of Indonesia, Cambodian genocide, Tiananmen Square incidents. A more general-purpose rule bans highly controversial topics such as separatism, religion, sex conflicts, conflicts between ethnic groups, for instance, exaggerating the Islamic sex conflicts, inciting the independence of Northern Ireland, Republic of Chechnya, Tibet, and Taiwan, and exaggerating the ethnic conflict between black and white. All of the above violations
Those are all
result in
banned
posts
stuff?
being marked visible to self. ByteDance replied with the following. In TikTok's early days, we took a blunt approach to minimizing conflict on the platform, and our moderation guidelines allowed penalties to be given for things like content that promoted conflict, such as between religious, sex, or ethnic groups, spanning a number of regions around the world. As TikTok began to take off globally last year, we recognized that this was not the correct approach and began working to empower local teams that have a nuanced understanding of each market. As we've grown, we've implemented this localized approach across everything from product to team to policy development. The old guidelines in question are outdated and no longer in use. Today, we take localized approaches, including local moderators, local content and moderation policies, local refinement of global policies, and more. We also consult with a number of independent local committees and are working to scale this at a global level, including forming an independent committee of leading industry organizations and experts to continually assess these policies. We also understand the need to be more transparent in communicating the policies that we develop and enforce to maintain a safe and positive app environment. Users gravitate to TikTok because it provides an app experience that fosters their creativity, and we are committed to supporting that across our teams, products, policies, and the way in which we openly communicate with our community. And The Guardian labeled this as TikTok, quote, advancing Chinese foreign policy aims through the app. Unfortunately for TikTok, the alarm
That's
was
an
sounded.
insane
In
head.
October
That's
of
an
2019,
insane
U.S. politicians began
headline.
calling for a federal investigation of Musical.ly's acquisition and an investigation on national security on TikTok. By January of 2020, the Pentagon banned the application from all military phones and urged all personnel to delete it from their personal phones as well only a month prior. The first attempt or talks of a ban wouldn't come until July of 2020, when President Donald Trump said he was considering banning TikTok as a retaliation for his belief that China grossly
That was in
mishandled the pandemic.
2020?
Following this up, he signed an executive
first
order
talks
that
of
banned
the
American
TikTok
companies from any
ban?
transaction with ByteDance, as well as its subsidiaries, namely TikTok.
I thought Joe
Only a
Biden
few
had
days
talked
later, he
about
issued
it
a
like
second executive
2
order
years ago or
demanding that
something.
ByteDance sell
I hope the
TikTok to the
timeline
U.S. assets
continues.
within 90 days, and this is where we first got news of potential buyers like Microsoft. But the deal never happened, and TikTok
Microsoft
sued
is
the
not
Trump
buying
administration for
TikTok.
violation of due process in its executive orders. In November of 2020, Joe Biden was elected president, which left a couple of months for Trump in office. And it seemed like TikTok fell out of his priority list because at first they extended the deadline for the sale and eventually just let it go altogether.
This is after Biden had
Joe
won.
Biden didn't propose any policy on it, and after he was inaugurated, he
going
even
to he
postponed
went
all the legal
to when
cases
he won.
related to Trump's banning of TikTok. At this point, Joe Biden's administration had zero issue with TikTok, and whilst TikTok would continue to occasionally get viral news articles about them regarding things such as their algorithm feeding content that allegedly encouraged eating disorders, it would be business as usual until June of 2022. At this point, TikTok had
I was
become
right,
Instagram the
2022.
most downloaded app in the world, and a report was put out only a month later that accused the Chinese division of ByteDance of repeatedly accessing private information of TikTok users. In the article, they reviewed leaked audio from over 80 internal TikTok meetings that showed that China-based employees of ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, have accessed non-public data of U.S. TikTok users multiple times. There were 14 statements from 9 different
they got
employees
they
that
got
from
my
September
data?
2021 to January of 2022.
What data?
Engineers had access to U.S. data.
Hope they don't
According
got
to the
that.
tapes, U.S. employees at TikTok did not have access or knowledge to this data. Everything is seen in China, said a member of TikTok's Trust and Safety Department in a September 2021 meeting. In another September meeting, a director referred to one Beijing-based engineer as a master admin who, quote, has access to everything. However, most of this information is something
Access
that China
to
would be able
everything.
to buy from data brokers, and TikTok would soon after transfer all the U.S. user data to Oracle's cloud infrastructure, which is an American company. In December of 2022, ByteDance fired 4 employees who looked into the data on journalists from the expose article done by BuzzFeed News during the time they were trying to find leaks that were confidential regarding the company. The FBI director Chris Rapp would also warn that China could manipulate the algorithm to influence Americans, despite much information as to how. In February of 2023, the White
I
House
wonder
told
if
all
that's what
government
happened
officials that
with
they had
the-
30 days to make sure TikTok was deleted on their
With the,
phones.
the Galaxy
FBI
gas.
and FCC said that ByteDance could share their data with China. In January of 2024, TikTok announced it was restricting a feature that allowed people to analyze the popular videos on their platform. This is something that the music industry had
What?
issue with in their initial statement. But by March, a bill to ban TikTok or force it to sell to a U.S. company would once again gain favor, this time in Congress. TikTok, through notifications, would encourage their users to reach out to their lawmakers and speak against this bill or that TikTok would be banned. which rallied many creators on the platform, businesses.
They got rid of something that you can look at good
a month later, the Senate
analytics
followed
with.
up with Congress an agreement, sending the bill to Joe Biden, who agreed to sign it, which is a complete 180. There was no new information that had come in the past couple of years about TikTok from when Trump was in office. In May of 2024, TikTok and ByteDance sued the U.S. federal government to challenge the law that would force the sale of ByteDance's stake or face a ban under the grounds that the law was unconstitutional.
They sued them. The Israel connection. Politics, the music industry, and TikTok. History of industry.
Israel has strong
Israel's
ties to
connection
entertainment
with the
companies in the
music
U.S.,
industry.
not just Hollywood productions, but also music, and objective ties too. Just starting from the top, Lucian Grange could be spotted showing his support at a 2016 fundraiser in Beverly Hills named Friends of the Israel Defense Forces Western Region Gala. He's the most powerful man in music, and while he doesn't directly have any organizations that connect to Israel, someone very close to him does. His wife, Caroline Grange, formerly Caroline Lewis, is involved in multiple political and advocacy groups on behalf of Israel. She's a trustee of the Bernard Lewis Family Charitable Trust, whose assets are held by the Lewis Trust Group, which is controlled by an offshore company registered in the tax haven of the Cayman Islands. Her family is best known as owners of the River Island clothing stores and worth billions. Through her role at the trust, Caroline has funded the Zionist Federation, the Mossad-trained Community Security Trust, the Conservative Party, the reportedly Islamophobic Henry Jackson Society, and one of Israel's national institutions, the United Jewish Israel Appeal. Haim Saban was appointed as non-executive director of UMG by Lucian Grange in May of 2023. Haim Saban was born in Egypt but grew up in Israel, served in their military, and was involved in the music industry early on, going from playing in a band to becoming a manager, to running a record label in France, to starting a company in Los Angeles, with the wildly successful intellectual property that is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, amongst many other shows and movies he produced.
Mighty Morphin
Saban has
Power
done business
Rangers.
with UMG for years. His company, Saban Music Group, a subsidiary of his Saban Capital Group, had signed a global distribution and marketing deal with UMG back in early 2020. Haim Saban's most recognizable quote
Okay,
that
he
has
signed-
said to the
he's-
press in
he-
two separate
his-
interviews,
his
one in
group has signed a
2004
deal with
and another in
UMG.
2010 is, "I'm a one-issue guy, and my issue is Israel." In September of 2023, he gave an interview to an Israeli newspaper in Hebrew, in which he divulged that he was invited to lunch at the White House with Biden for an hour, but the meeting lasted 3 hours. He justified giving money to AIPAC,
What is
a
Biden
Republican
invited
organization
him
that
to
supports
the
election
White
deniers,
House?
because his one issue is Israel. The only goal of this organization is to prevent people who are against U.S.-Israel relations from advancing, and to support those who support relations between Jerusalem and Washington. Many Democrats called me and said, "Are you stupid? You're a Democrat who supports 2020 election deniers?" I always say the same thing. It's a specific, defined issue, and that is the U.S.-Israel relationship. In that sense, I'm not interested in anything else. Saban is a dual citizen of Israel and America, and he has historically supported Democratic candidates, barring them showing any criticisms of Israel. So he was against Bernie Sanders, calling him, quote, an anti-Israel person, and Keith Ellison, quote, clearly an anti-Semite and anti-Israel individual. Haim was a significant contributor to Joe Biden winning the election in 2020. He raised $4.5 million for him at a fundraiser 2 months before the 2020 election,
million.
and he gave over $4 million to Democrats in that cycle. This brings us into a
that's
woman who's
8.5.
closely connected to Saban and the music industry. Back in 2001, a woman named Esther Renzer would co-found an organization called Stand With Us that was also known as Israel Emergency Alliance. It's an NGO and advocacy group for
IEA,
pro-Israel
Stand
interests
With
operating
Us.
across college campuses in the United States,
Okay.
the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, South Africa, Brazil, and even Argentina. Their claims are that they try to combat anti-Semitism and misinformation related to Israel, but what it has demonstrated itself as doing is spreading propaganda and being an arm of the Israeli government. This was confirmed by Israeli diplomat and deputy foreign minister at the time, Danny Ayalon. It is very important to make use of every means at our
That
disposal.
dude kinda look
mainly
like
legal
Shroud.
means. It is against American law to engage in boycotts, certainly on any political basis, including this one. We are moving to a policy that is much more proactive, a policy that doesn't just react. And it's true, we are using this organization Stand With Us to amplify our power. This was in context of a lawsuit that was brought against Olympia Food in 2012, which was the first U.S. grocery store to publicly honor the boycott of Israeli products in order to force them to stock ice cream cones that were sourced from Israel. Olympia Food would end up winning the lawsuit. In a now deleted article from Stand With Us webpage, they announced that they worked with the Israel Foreign Ministry to train students to be PR agents for Israel. Endorsed by Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the National Union of Israeli Students, this prestigious program trains outstanding students from major Israeli universities across the country and prepares them to assume leadership roles in Israeli society. Alumni of the program have interned and worked at the White House, several Israeli government ministries, and embassies around the world, and at prominent NGOs. In 2015, it was reported by the Times of Israel and the Israeli Prime Minister's office was going to contribute $250,000 to Stand With Us. That was to, quote, strengthen Israeli advocacy on social media networks. It was reported that this did
What
not
does
end up
that
happening,
even mean?
but it still demonstrates how closely Stand With Us worked with the Israeli government. It trains students in, quote, pro-Israel activism and gives them material to strengthen their arguments, as well as using them to make sure that the sentiment of Israel amongst students in colleges remains positive. Amongst these lessons is the following, quote, always include the word peace in your answer. If the Israeli side says peace more times than the Palestinian side says peace, we will win the PR war. They train students to record
I don't
events
think
that
that's
may be
how the
remotely
PR
critical of
works.
Israel and send them to stand with us. An example of this that failed was their run-in with the Jewish Voice for Peace organization in 2010. Jewish Voice for Peace is an anti-Zionist organization, and in their own words, quote, "We are accountable to Palestinian-led organizations and coalitions that represent and are themselves accountable to Palestinian communities and who share the values of freedom, justice, and equality for all people." They were holding a meeting for about 50 to 60 people in South Berkeley Senior Center when a Stand With Us member, Robin Dubner, an attorney from Oakland, draped in an Israeli flag,
This is
pepper
Israel,
sprayed
Palestine
two
stuff
JVP members
in
in the eyes and
2010?
face after they tried to
How far
non-violently
back
block her
does
from
this
recording
go?
the faces of those attending the meeting against their will.
I'm Alexi Folger. I'm a member of JVP. I was in the meeting and I was trying to
Wait,
stop
okay,
the
let's
woman
start over
from
again.
videotaping, and without realizing it ahead of time, she pulled out pepper spray and sprayed it all over the side of my head and on my hands.
Dubner was also recording with a concealed video camera in a pen that was clipped to the pocket of her shirt. This covert
That's
recording is
calm.
a tactic we covered earlier that Stand With Us likes to
They got a
employ.
pin
The
shirt.
Jewish Voice for Peace wanted to protect the identities of those in attendance because they had a run-in with something similar earlier that same year.
A pin
Caught on a
camera.
widely seen videotape was a SFVI SWU Stand With Us supporter pointing his camera to the faces of silent peace vigil participants while saying, "You're all being identified, every last one of you. We will find out where you live. We're going to make your lives difficult. We will disrupt your families." The way in which this relates to the music industry is that Esther Renzer, the co-founder of Stand With Us, is married to David Renzer, who was the former chairman and CEO of Universal Music Publishing, and also spent an extended amount of time as president of music ventures for Saban Capital Group, which we alluded to earlier. There's a company owned by Haim Saban. But David Renzer
Almost
founded
no
this
smoke.
organization called Creative Community for Peace, or CCFP, in 2010-2011. The role of the CCFP was to incorporate culture like music and the arts as tools to further the agenda that Stand With Us had already begun. As a matter of fact, at its inception, Creative Community for Peace and Stand With Us were the exact same organization, despite their claim that they were totally different. In documents that were acquired by
What?
publication Mondoweiss, it clearly shows that one of the fictitious business names, also known as Doing Business As, or DBA, of Stand With Us Israel Emergency Alliance, IEA, was Creative Community for Peace. In 2013, the donation page on the Creative Community for Peace website also read, "Creative Community for Peace is a 501c3 organization, DBA Israel Emergency Alliance," which is backwards, the original.
Isn't
Israel
a
Emergency
501c3
Alliance.
is
But
a
nonetheless, it proves they were the same organization.
is a non-profit,
JVP
no?
has also put out material calling out Creative Community for Peace and Stand With Us as being the same organization. One of the claims of Creative Community for Peace is that music and the arts are bridges to peace and they should not be politicized. We believe art and music must be embraced as tools to transcend political tensions. It is time to stop the politicization of art. Although their actions have been heavily criticized for weaponizing music and art in favor of Israel. After all, in 2009, before Creative Community for Peace was even formed, David Renzer had a piece written about him on the Jerusalem Post that painted a different intention for his actions. If having influential friends in high places is part of Israel's poker hand in this high-stakes game of Hasbara, then Renzer is a sparkling ace in the hole. A behind-the-scenes A-lister, Renzer has never hid his affinity for Israel. For context, Hasbara is a Hebrew term meaning explanation and refers to public relations efforts by the State of Israel to put out information and promote its perspective internationally. Its intention is to influence public opinion and improve Israel's image abroad. This can include media campaigns, educational incentives, and diplomatic efforts. Better yet, propaganda. At the time, Renzer had been appointed the cultural chair of the LA
Propaganda.
Jewish Federation's Tel Aviv-Los Angeles partnership.
Me
To
when
explain
I
why he
spread
accepted the position,
misinformation
he
on the
cited the influence
internet.
of his wife, Stand With Us co-founder and president Esther Renzer. I thought of how much time and effort Esther puts into Israel. I said, you know what? I think I have to find a way to give a little bit back also. His wife would go on to say, what David and I do isn't so different. Stand With Us is dealing with correcting misinformation about Israel and with telling Israel's story in a positive manner. We talk about both divestment and investment. And part of telling Israel's story is speaking in the universal language of music and culture. Renzer also explained how he pulled some strings for the Israeli consulate. Recently, the
sounded a
Israeli
little
consulate in LA was putting
suspicious.
together an event and was trying to reach Gustavo Dudamel, the celebrated new director of the LA Philharmonic. He happens to be signed to one of our classical record labels. So I reached out to the head of our classical record
A
label
lot
and got them together.
suspicious.
The Creative Community for Peace, as well as Stand With Us, are fervently against the BDS, which is Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement that Jewish Voice for Peace supports. BDS urges many companies, artists, and people to boycott Israel, and one of the early boycotts that sent ripples throughout the industry was when Lorde canceled her show that she was scheduled to perform in 2017 at Tel Aviv, Israel. She put out the following statement. Hey guys, so about this Israel show, I've received an overwhelming number of messages and letters, and I've had a lot of discussions with people holding many views, and I think the right decision at this time is to cancel the show. I pride myself on being an informed young citizen, and I had done a lot of reading and sought a lot of opinions before deciding to book a show in Tel Aviv, but I'm not too proud to admit I didn't make the right call on this one. Tel Aviv, it's been a dream of mine to visit this beautiful part of the world for many years, and I'm truly sorry to
Made the
reverse my
wrong
commitment
decision.
to come play for you. I hope one day we can all dance.
At least you ain't
The
got
Palestinian
enough
campaign for the academic and cultural
ego
boycott of Israel thanked
to
Lorde on
be
Twitter.
like,
Thank you,
oh, I
Lord, for
didn't
canceling the
make a
Tel Aviv
decision.
show and heeding appeals from your fans
I
against
did
Israel's
make a
art washing
mistake.
of its brutal oppression of Palestinians. Your unwavering commitment to progressive values inspires us and gives us hope. This was met with ire from Creative Community for Peace, who released their own statement titled, "Entertainment Industry Group Responds to Lord's Israel Cancellation." We, the undersigned artists and entertainment industry executives, are deeply disappointed that Lord canceled their show in Tel Aviv after receiving pressure from the radical Boycott Israel movement. Artists should never become beholden to the political views of a small but loud minority. The boycott movement, while often painting itself as a movement for human rights, is actually a political movement ultimately aiming to extinguish the state of Israel as the state of the Jewish people. Ignoring the many flaws in the other countries on Lord's world tour, including the US, the UK, and Russia, the movement singled out Israel, and only Israel, for a boycott. It was viewed as threatening by many when you consider the signees, executives of the biggest publishers, record labels, management companies, and law firms in the entertainment industry. And she received major backlash. Rabbi Shmuley, who famously had a back and forth with political commentator Candace Owens earlier this year, took out an advertisement on the Washington Post saying that she, in reference to Lord, joined an anti-Semitic boycott and portrayed her as a bigot, a young 21-year-old. Steve Schnurr, co-founder of CCFP as well as worldwide executive and music president of Electronic Arts, the game company, Jody Gerson, chairman and CEO of Universal Music Publishing Group, and many others. Some would think that this would strike fear into many artists that would consider boycotting or speaking out, and it likely did. But that didn't make it easier for Creative Community for Peace or Israel, because in 2022, the Sydney Festival in Australia, the country's biggest culture festival of the year, was sponsored by the Israeli government, and the Sydney Festival had them listed as a star sponsor. This led to many grassroots organizers trying to urge performers to boycott the event, and Creative Community for Peace would come in and try to flex their muscles with an open letter on their site titled, "Entertainment Industry Leaders Stand United Against Cultural Boycott of Israel and in Support of Sydney Festival." Here, they attempt to urge the Sydney Festival to continue. The organizers of the Sydney Festival boycott intentionally misrepresent the truth about Israel and make provocative statements to try and bully artists into backing out of the festival. Their messages deceptively involve an element of dishonesty and deny the truth of Jewish indigeneity.
I'm not gonna lie.
Their actions only further hostility and dampen hope for peace, which all of us so urgently desire. This failed.
This video is definitely the most information I've got about the Israel
organic movement and protest that led to over 30 acts pulling out of performing in the days leading up to the Sydney Festival. This wasn't without conversation, however. One of the bands that pulled out, Tropical F-Storm, had attempted to come to a resolution that the Sydney Festival refused. Unbeknownst to everyone out there in internet mobland, we have been doing our best to talk to Sydney Festival about the possibility of them refunding and ending their partnership with 2022 star sponsor, the Israeli Embassy, who donated a paltry $20,000 to some dance group. Rather than immediately announce online that we jumped ship, we thought we'd actually try to do something in the real world for everyone involved and try to encourage Sydney Festival to do the right thing and fix the problem they created. That problem being the Sydney Festival taking on a sponsor so dodgy, pointless, and controversial, it would inevitably mean that hundreds of unwitting artists who are having a rough enough time with the pandemic as it is would become the targets of online harassment, bullying, smear campaigns, ridiculous accusations, misrepresentations, and abuse from total strangers who have no idea what's actually going on behind the scenes, what any artist's position is, or even what they're talking about. Artists were getting bullied until about 48 hours ago. At the time of posting, Sydney Festival has stated they have no intention to refund the money or sever the sponsorship relationship, even though the shit sandwich they've landed every billed artist in is blatantly obvious to them. Due to this complete lack of respect and integrity towards the artist billed from Sydney Festival and its partners, we have decided to cancel our 2 appearances. We want to apologize to our fans who have made arrangements to come to the show. We appreciate you all. When we
Sydney Fest was Bully Fest.
Sydney, it is going to be a corker. We will see you soon. This led to disaster
they was not
for the
playing
Sydney
out
Festival,
there.
with many acts pulling out last minute due to their hubris of wanting to stick to a contribution from a foreign government whose contribution was in no way critical to the event, but they decided to die on that hill. And die they did, because later that year, in preparation for the next event, the Sydney Festival would announce that they suspended all funding agreements with foreign governments and their cultural agencies after the mass boycott by artists at the 2022 Sydney Festival. Soon after October 7th, there was an outpour of sympathy worldwide for the innocent victims killed. Although this sympathy would flip on its head in the coming weeks and months when footage of the brutality that the IDF was raining on Gaza began to spread. This allowed for an organic movement to grow across the world of people condemning and criticizing the actions of the Israeli government and its military. It was in early November that talks of a, quote, anti-Israel bias on TikTok began to grow, really being kicked off in late October by Jeff Morris Jr., a previous executive at Tinder, with his long thread titled The TikTok War, Why High School and College Kids Are Getting the Wrong Information About Hamas and Israel. It's obvious the side he leaned on. Tweets back in the past show he had visited Israel many times before, but in this thread he attempts to incorrectly make the case that TikTok was rewarding pro-Palestinian content in the algorithm, and that's the reason why the majority of young people were anti-Israel. He said, when I engaged with one post on TikTok supporting opposing views, my entire feed became aggressively anti-Israel. Which is no surprise, that's how the majority of algorithms on social platforms work. If I were to interact with vegan content, it would serve me a lot more vegan content. It doesn't mean TikTok or any other platform is anti-meat. He would follow this up with an attempt at comparing the views on hashtags or keywords. I then looked at the data and saw that Israel is losing the TikTok war by a long shot. As an example, the top hashtag is 3 billion views for Palestine versus 200 million views for Israel. If you look at other hashtags, it is clear that Israel has a distribution issue. You can also see the
distribution issue.
This was debunked by an NBC article that made it clear the results shown
but
on those
it's
searches
not
are
my
from
fault
3
that
years
those
ago,
other TikToks
not the
went
previous
crazy.
30 days. And when it was constrained to the previous 30 days with a third-party tool, it showed that pro-Israel hashtags in the US were receiving the same, if not more, attention on the app, bringing the claims of favoritism into question. According
so
to
they
the
was
message
just
tool,
they was
hashtag Stand With
cap.
Palestine was used on 9,000 videos with over 27 million views in the US. During the same period in the US, Stand With Israel was used on 5,000 videos with over 43 million views.
Oh,
the
nah.
hashtags Support Palestine and Support Israel were evenly tied in the US.
It's got more views
with both
and
being
less
used on about
tags.
1,000 posts with 6 million total views each. This is when lawmakers would hop in. Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee saying, "It would not be surprising that the Chinese-owned TikTok is
full
pushing
cap.
pro-Hamas content." And Republican Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri retweeted that thread that is still up, saying it was a, quote, purveyor of anti-Semitic lies. He had been one of the many that were supporting legislation to ban TikTok. TikTok replied to these accusations. "Our community guidelines apply equally to all content on TikTok, and we strongly reject any of the baseless claims to the contrary. We're committed to consistently enforcing our policies to protect our community." Bill Ackman, billionaire and founder-CEO of hedge fund Pershing Square, which has the largest holding of Universal Music Group outside of Vincent Vittori at a whopping 10%. Ackman was one of the earliest people to
10% is
reintroduce
a
the
lot
conversation
of a
TikTok being
music
banned in
group.
November, stating that it was, quote, amplifying the hate and massively manipulating public opinion. And yes,
They're probably
TikTok
making
should
billions
probably
of
be banned.
dollars.
A foreign government should not be in control of the minds of our
his
next
10%.
generation of leaders. Ackman was the first person to urge Harvard to dox student names who were protesting at the college so that he and his billionaire friends could avoid
Doxing
hiring.
people.
Something he would admit he was wrong and walk back after receiving tons of backlash from the public. Boycotts would really ramp up towards the end of 2023 and throughout 2024 after people began to witness, mainly through TikTok, the gruesome scenes happening in Palestine. This bothered many lobbyists with strong support for Israel by Jewish billionaires and people in the tech field, with one being Jacob Hellberg. Hellberg works for defense contractor Palantir that was co-founded by Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, the latter of which is so pro-Israel that he said the students protesting should be sent to North Korea and called them an infection to our society, also admitting he lost many employees
That's
for his strong
crazy.
support for Israel. Hellberg is also Jewish
I may
Israeli,
be
as
out the
cited by
loop,
a
but that
student,
still
and is a
sounds
direct
crazy.
advisor to Alex Karp.
I
The
don't
United
even know what
States
they
China
did. It's
Economic and
like that.
Security Review Commission was formed by Congress in 2001 as an advisory to keep it up to date on any national security threats from China. And Hellberg is also a member of this commission. Having spoken to over 100 members of Congress, he has repeatedly pushed for legislation to ban TikTok. TikTok is a scourge attacking our children and our social fabric, a threat to our national security, and likely the most extensive intelligence operation a foreign power has ever conducted against the United States. This was a quote from one of the addresses he made to Congress. But there's a conflict of interest here when you recognize that Alex Karp and Palantir stand to financially benefit from conflict between China and the United States. A Fortune article from September of 2023 focuses on this. Palantir relies on U.S. military and government contracts that are related to AI for nearly 60% of its revenue and would likely benefit from a China-U.S. tech war. In the second quarter, Palantir's total revenue was $533 million, of which $302 million came from the government.
60%
The firm
of
has
the
major
revenue
contracts
is
with the U.S. Special
is-
Operations Command, the U.S.
they're
State
using
Department,
AI
the U.S.
for it?
Department of Defense, and multiple other agencies to provide software and AI applications for military use. It is a clear conflict of interest to have an advisor to Palantir serve
AI
on a
going
commission
crazy,
that is
60%
making
of
sensitive
the revenue.
recommendations about economic and security
Say
relations
500
between the
mil.
U.S. and China. From their perspective, China is a
But
mortal
like
adversary, and the only way to, quote, beat them is
340
to further subsidize the tech
something?
sector so we can rapidly build next-generation systems that can overwhelm China in a potential conflict, to the financial benefit of Palantir and its Silicon Valley allies. Even going back to 2020, there was no evidence found by the CIA that China had ever used TikTok to gather data or information on American users. There was a brief hiccup in 2021 from the BuzzFeed article with the leaked audios we covered early, but even as recent as December of 2023, a research team at the Georgia Tech School of Public Policy Internet
Georgia
Governance
Tech.
Project came to the same conclusion, that threats of TikTok being used by the Chinese government as some sort of weapon are overstated and not based in fact. Chinese government efforts to assert control over ByteDance's Chinese subsidiaries are targeting its domestic services, not its overseas operations. They also found no evidence that it was using TikTok to promote Chinese
So,
propaganda, or that it
they
was
was
any more
capping.
dangerous than other social media applications. The data collected by TikTok can only be of espionage value if it comes from users who are intimately
It was
connected to
capping
national
because
security
TikTok
functions
was
and use
owned
the
by-
app in ways that
by
expose
Chinese
sensitive information.
by
These
the
risks
Chinese,
arise from the use of any social
company.
media app, not just TikTok, and cannot be mitigated by arbitrarily banning one app.
It's
But that's
normal
exactly
levels.
what Hellberg hawked when he was consistently
they're
flying back
saying.
and forth from Miami to DC, inviting lawmakers to his home in Miami with his husband Keith Rabois, another Silicon Valley investor that is staunchly pro-Israel, to make sure that people got the message. For over a year,
Normal
he said
levels
yes to
of
every speaking
manipulation,
engagement and TV spot,
whatever.
invited lawmakers to his home with Rabois in Miami, and was on a plane to Washington 3 times a week, drilling in the message every time that TikTok should be treated as a tool of the Chinese Communist Party. This is in part due to Palantir founder Peter Thiel's strong anti-China stance. He has not spoken on anything Israel-related, but he is very against China and has been known to make some brazen statements that some would consider unconventional. In 2019, he said that Google, which
Unconventional,
abandoned
I
China,
know what
was
that
infiltrated by
means.
Chinese intelligence,
Cue the
has
Uncle
said, quote,
Rex
I do
music.
wonder whether at this point, Bitcoin should also be thought of in part as a Chinese financial weapon against the US, and continuously harps on how dangerous Chinese technology is to national security, whilst offering the solution, his company, and positioning it as the technology that would offset any potential invasion of Taiwan by China. In February of 2024, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, even flew to Hank Saban's home in Los Angeles to meet with him. Saban is not just any ordinary donor to have the president fly to him. But unfortunately for Saban, he tested positive for COVID, so was unable to be there. But he held a Zoom conversation with Joe Biden from another room in the same house. While I can't share details from our one-on-one conversation, I can share that President Biden cares deeply about Israel. It's in his kishkas. He cares about Israel's security and ensuring that Israel remains a prosperous Jewish and democratic state. It was only several weeks later that Joe Biden would endorse the legislation that could lead to TikTok being banned in the U.S. The legislation that passed through the U.S. House Energy and Commerce Committee unanimously on Thursday calls on China's ByteDance to divest its ownership of TikTok or effectively face a U.S. ban. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson also supports the bill and has indicated it would soon come up for a full vote in the House.
After the balls call,
I'll sign it. That was the quote said by Joe Biden. This would serve Saban's interests as TikTok was the least restrictive platform when it came to pro-Palestinian and anti-Zionist content post-October 7th. The bill is very important, as we'll get into a bit later in the timeline, but now we're in March of 2024. The U.S. Army had long since been a partner and sponsor of South by Southwest, which is the biggest event in Austin, Texas of the year, comprising festivals, conferences related to music, media, film, and technology. It's one of the most recognized events in America, and people from all over the world travel there. Defense contractor and weapons manufacturer RTX Corporation, formerly known as Raytheon, was also a sponsor. The fact here is that they produce many weapons that the Israeli government uses. But there was also controversy on an earnings call in late October, where the chairman and executive director of the company, Greg Hayes, was quoted saying, "I think really across the entire Raytheon portfolio, you're going to see a benefit of this restocking, on top of what we think is going to be an increase in DoD top line, Department of Defense." This led to another organic boycott that was led by an artist named Squirrel Flower that put out a statement on Instagram. "I've decided to pull out of my official South by Southwest showcases in protest of their ties to the defense industry and in support of the Palestinian people. There are many ways South by Southwest is harmful to working musicians, but I'm pulling out specifically because of the fact that South by Southwest is platforming defense contractors, including Raytheon subsidiaries, as well as the U.S. Army, a main sponsor of the festival. The IDF has now killed at least 1 in every 75 inhabitants of Gaza, including 12,300
He's pulling out because they're supporting somebody that's making guns?
Genocide profiteers like Raytheon supply weapons to the IDF, paid for by our taxes. A music festival should not include war profiteers. I refuse to be complicit in this and withdraw my art and labor in protest." This led to a couple of other artists following her lead.
I mean, if you want to do that, yes. But I'm getting this bag.
Greg Abbott had the following to say:
I can't even
"Bye.
cap.
Don't come back. We're proud of the U.S. military in Texas. If you don't like it, don't come here." Even Southwest wouldn't budge, at first. They defended their partnerships. "We fully respect the decision these artists made to exercise their rights of free speech. Across the globe, we are witnessing unspeakable tragedies, the rise of repressive regimes, and the increasing spread of violent conflict. It's more crucial than ever that we come together to solve these greater humanitarian issues. The defense industry has historically been a proving ground for many of the systems we rely on today. These institutions are often leaders in emerging technologies, and we believe it's better to understand how their approach will impact our lives." This was not received well, and Squirrel Flower's initial domino led to over 80 other artists pulling out of South by Southwest as well. At this point, some thought that the top-down pressure was too strong for an organic movement to stand up to it in America.
South by Southwest might be going down that year.
However, that wasn't the case. Soon after, South by Southwest announced they terminated their partnership with the U.S. Army, RTX, and any of its subsidiaries for their upcoming event in 2025 after many artists withdrew from their event this year. They made a statement that was added to their FAQ section that
when you mess with somebody's money, they gonna have to pull some moves.
reads,
They gotta
"After
change
careful
something.
consideration, we are revising our sponsorship model. As a result, the U.S. Army
Everybody
and
sold
companies
their
who engage in
tickets,
weapons
all type
manufacturing
of-
will not be sponsors of
Yeah.
South by Southwest 2025. That same month, the House of Representatives passed a bill that would ban TikTok in America if they don't sell it. Congress is composed of the House of Representatives and the Senate, so the bill passed with a vote 352 to 65 in the House, and would now
that's a
proceed to the
blowout.
Senate.
That's
The
a
day before
blowout.
the House of Representatives voted, top national security officials in the Biden administration held a briefing with
300
lawmakers to discuss
what?
TikTok and the
60?
supposed national security risks. What we've tried to do here is be very thoughtful and deliberate about the need to force a divestiture of TikTok without granting any authority to the executive branch to regulate content or go after any American company, said Representative Mike Gallagher, the bill's author. Certain members of the House weren't convinced during the briefing. Not a single thing that we heard in today's classified briefing was unique to TikTok. It was things that happen on every single social media platform. The Senate would vote in favor of the TikTok ban 79 to 18 in April, and Mike Gallagher, one of the most
everybody
progressive
wanted
lawmakers
that
was pushing
TikTok
this TikTok bill, would retire several weeks
79
later,
to
leaving
18.
Congress early to take a job at none
That's
other
like
than
everybody
Pfizer,
in there.
the company that stood to financially benefit from this bill passing, with increased tension between China and the U.S., and also controlling the Israel narrative in America. In a piece by the Financial Times, China's foreign ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin was quoted as saying that America used, quote, robber's logic regarding TikTok. Quote, when you see
Robert's
other people's
logic.
good things, you must find ways to own them. He Yadong, spokesperson for the Commerce Ministry, called out Washington, D.C., telling them to stop unfairly suppressing foreign companies. After hearing the news, Steve Mnuchin, former Treasury Secretary and
he said they mad they can't get no social media to blow up like TikTok
for an Israeli cybersecurity company several years prior, would quickly come out with strong interest in buying TikTok, with names thrown in the mix like Bill Ackman, Sam Altman of OpenAI, who married Keith Rabois to his husband Jacob Hellberg, and also supports their same causes, and several others who conveniently have identical political views on Israel and would benefit from censoring any type of content that wasn't in line with the image the US government would like. May would be a hectic month with several events happening at once. We would get new developments on the more likely reasoning for Congress moving to ban TikTok. Utah Senator Mitt Romney and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken were at the McCain Institute, where Romney expressed his disbelief at what was happening with young Americans' lack of support for Israel. I mean, typically the Israelis are good at PR. What happened here? How have they, and we, been so ineffective at communicating the realities there and our point of view? Blinken would reply with an attempt at an explanation for what was happening. And you have a social media environment in which context, history, facts get lost, and the emotion, the impact dominates. It has a very challenging impact on the narrative. Romney would continue to give a strong reasoning for why Congress moved to ban TikTok, and it wasn't because of China like many Americans were told.
Why has the PR been so awful? I know that's not your area of expertise, but you have to have some thoughts on that, which is, I mean, as you said, why has Hamas disappeared in terms of public perception? An offer is on the table to have a ceasefire, and yet the world is screaming about Israel. It's like, why are they not screaming about Hamas? Accept the ceasefire, bring home the hostages. It said it's all the other way around. Typically, the Israelis are good at PR. What's happened here? How have they and we been so ineffective at communicating the realities there? And
are on an intravenous feed of information with new impulses, inputs every millisecond. And of course, the way this is played out on social media has dominated the narrative. And you have a social media ecosystem environment in which context, history, facts get lost, and the emotion, the impact of images
kind of just spit a little facts
dominates, and we can't discount that. But I think it also has a very, very, very challenging effect on the narrative.
Yeah, a small parenthetical point, which is some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at the postings on TikTok and the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly so among TikTok broadcasts. So I know that's of real interest, and the president will get the chance to make action in that regard.
That same week, the Washington Post would put out a write-up titled "The Tech Billionaires Who Helped Ban TikTok Want to Write AI Rules for Trump." In it, they cover Hellberg, Palantir, Peter Thiel, and Silicon Valley's switch to supporting Donald Trump as a presidential candidate. Peter Thiel had long since supported Republicans, but the likes of Hellberg and many others switched their support. For what reason? Several, but a tweet by Hellberg encapsulates the main reason most of them share. On American Jewish Heritage Month, American Jews who still support Biden should have their heads examined. If you support Israel, there's only one choice in this election. Hellberg's actions on policy and the TikTok ban would get criticism from Ryan Callow, a law professor at the University of Washington focusing on AI policy.
I thought he was going to say have their heads
ban an
something
entire
else,
social media platform on the speculation
Victoria
of
Newman.
self-interested tech millionaires and the potential of AI to pose an existential risk to all of humanity, when what they would really like to see is the government pump a bunch of money into their products and stay out of their way. He was also critical of their doomsday marketing, which Hellberg and Vinod Khosla, billionaire investor in OpenAI's ChatGPT, penned an open letter in April to the US government as, quote, private citizens out of love for the United States who didn't stand to gain or lose anything, but wanted everyone to know that TikTok was a weapon of war by the Chinese government and likened the platform to fentanyl. They would benefit from the funding that the government would give to AI projects.
Weapon of war and likening it to
fentanyl against China. Just as stated 2 months prior, this is the way Washington works, said Scott Amy, general counsel at the Project on Government Oversight, a watchdog group. There are a lot of defense contractors that are discussing the China threat and an eye out on their bottom line. That same week, The Intercept released an audio recording that they were able to acquire in which you can hear Democratic representative in New Jersey, Josh Gottheimer, and Republican representative of New York, Mike Lawler, speak on the growing protests on college campuses, as well as reasons for the TikTok ban. It also highlights exactly why we included the TikTok bill in the foreign supplemental aid package, because you're seeing how these kids are being manipulated by certain groups or entities or countries to foment hate on their behalf and really create a hostile environment here in the US. The bill Lawler is referring to here is the one that Biden agreed to sign, but what wasn't highlighted in most headlines is that it was included as a part of a larger $95 billion package that provides foreign aid to Ukraine and Israel. Foreign aid, Ukraine and Israel, including a bill to ban TikTok. The frustration from figures like Lawler, Romney, Gottheimer, and many others is the lack of support from the younger generation for Israel. In a poll taken by Pew Research, it showed that a third of Americans under 30 said their sympathies lied mostly or entirely with Palestine, and only 14% said their sympathies lied mostly or entirely with Israel. The rest were either 50-50 or unsure. This is a massive difference as you go up in age groups, evident by the sliding bars on the chart. And when you get to Americans over 65, 47% of their sympathies were with the Israeli people and only 9% with the Palestinians. Will Bunch, columnist at the Philadelphia Inquirer, had the following to say. During the war...
See, bro, me personally, I don't even know what I don't know the background, nothing.
Most mainstream Western journalists have been blocked from entering the war zone. The best source of real-time information is often the phone video of airstrikes and their aftermath, either shot by Palestinian journalists, more than 90 of whom have been killed, or civilian bystanders. The reason so many under 30 folks have adopted the Palestinian cause isn't disinformation from Hamas or China or anyone else. They've been radicalized by the truth. Daily videos of young children, some of them bloodied, some of them already dead, covered in dust and targeted by 2,000-pound dumb bombs made right here in America. Many protesters and those opposing Israel even said part of what informed their decision-making wasn't just Palestinian-sided TikToks, but the TikToks that IDF soldiers were brazenly posting themselves. Controlling the narrative is so central to billionaire lobbyists who support Israel, as well as Congress, that their last-ditch effort was to get the application banned entirely, which some believe is one of the worst attacks on the First Amendment ever. Banning a social media platform that hundreds of millions of Americans use to express themselves would have devastating consequences for all of our First Amendment rights. A Washington Post expose of a
really, bro, there's other apps.
WhatsApp group chat of over 100 people, all pro-Israel, with Mayor Eric Adams of New York regarding shutting down the college protests, but mainly in controlling the PR and pro-Israel narrative they wanted to carry in America. This chat had existed since October of 2023, started on behalf of billionaire real estate mogul Barry Sternlicht by a staffer of his on October 12th. The first message was posted on behalf of Sternlicht that the goal of the chat was to, quote, change the narrative in favor of Israel. This same staffer would make it clear that Sternlicht was very proud of his Jewish heritage and wanted to support Israel, but was concerned with his privacy. Anonymity is a practical need and concern for the safety of my family in an increasingly complex world. He extended this to the rest of the chat and let them all know contributions to the media campaign he was building would be anonymous. Another message would be relayed to the chat from Sternlicht's staffer saying,
the contributions will
to
be
concerns about being
anonymous.
less effective if it appears that this is a Jewish initiative. The same day, the staffer would say that while Israel was focused on winning the physical war, the chat group's members would, quote, help win the war of U.S. public opinion. This would begin in November of 2023, with news site Semaphore reporting that Sternlicht, alongside other Wall Street and Hollywood billionaires, would spend upwards of $50 million in order to distinguish between anti-Semites and the Palestinian situation. He wrote, as U.S. and global media increasingly focus coverage on deaths in Gaza, potentially eroding support and sympathy for Israel, public opinion will surely shift as scenes, real or fabricated by Hamas, of civilian Palestinian suffering will surely erode Israel's current empathy in the world community. We must get ahead of the narrative. This was the media campaign referenced earlier in the chat, and the attempt would fail, as TikTok and live coverage would stoke a fire in many people within America, shifting the narrative in the other direction, as well as Sternlicht's stated goal of defining Hamas not just the enemy of Israel, but the United States. This group consisted of roughly a dozen men who appear on Forbes' annual list of billionaires, others at the top of real estate, finance, and communications. Amongst these were former CEO of Starbucks Howard Schultz, Dell founder and CEO Michael Dell, hedge fund manager Bill Ackman, Joshua Kushner, brother of Jared Kushner, Len Blavatnik, owner of Warner Music Group, amongst many others. In the months leading up to the protests, some chat members attended private briefings with former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Benny Gantz, a member of the Israeli War Cabinet, and Israel's ambassador to the United States, Michael Herzog. This would lead to the members working with the Israeli government to air a 40-minute IDF atrocity propaganda film titled Bearing Witness to the October 7th Massacre in New York that was shown on November 10th in Gotham Hall, as well as requesting help from the chat to show the film at colleges, eventually being shown at Harvard, which was attended, promoted, and facilitated by one of the members of the chat.
Gotham exists?
Members of the group would go as far as urging each other to flag news articles or social media posts that were critical of Israel, sympathetic to Gaza, or later, the biggest thorn in their side, college campus protests. Columbia University students first set up an encampment April 17th, which led to some Jewish students claiming that the atmosphere was hostile, whilst nobody was harmed. Police would come in and clear it out at the request of Columbia only a day later, April 18th, arresting over 100 protesters. Adams would allege that student activists were affected by, quote, outside influences, and that police intervention was needed to prevent, quote, children from being radicalized. The next day, though, students built up another demonstration, and this time Columbia higher-ups were not going to request for police to remove them, which was a problem for Mayor Eric Adams and the others in the chat, because they wanted them gone. Len Blavatnik would kick things off, sending a photo of Eric Adams with the quote, he needs help. Joseph Sitt of Ashley Stewart would reply that he had already been helping, but more support was needed, and asked if anyone else from the group was up to donating to Adams as well. Blavatnik would send a donation link and make it known that he had donated the maximum monthly amount of $2,100. Daniel Lubetsky, owner of Kind Snack Bars, would follow up with, if there's a group to contribute through, or a way to ensure our contributions are known to be related to his efforts to fight anti-Semitism and hate, please let us know and I'll support meaningfully alongside you guys. So on April 26th, the Zoom call was attended by Mayor Adams, Lubetsky, Blavatnik, Sitt, and Daniel Loeb of Third Point. The Washington Post wrote this about what was covered. Sit wrote minutes after the call ended to summarize items discussed today, including donating to Adams, using group members' leverage to help persuade Columbia's president to let New York police back on campus, and paying for investigative efforts to assist the city. Lubetsky replied listing concrete actions group members should take. These included resharing a link to other financial support to Adams, calling and writing to Columbia's president and board of trustees, and, quote, getting black leaders to condemn anti-Semitism. He named several people he would contact and asked if anyone in the group knew Jay-Z, LeBron James, or Alicia Keys. Asked about his comments, Lubetsky wrote in a statement to the Post that
he was trying to pay the celebs
is more important than ever. Blavatnik, through a spokeswoman, confirmed he attended the Zoom with Adams, but said he did not participate in a conversation about private investigators and is unaware of discussions related to that subject. The spokeswoman noted other people on the Zoom said things Blavatnik did not weigh in or agree with. She said the billionaire, a Columbia alumnus and donor, only joined the Zoom to understand how Adams was thinking about the Columbia protests. The protests continued on, with this, more media attention, the movement spreading further throughout America, and frustrations in the chat rising. Loeb would write, a sad state that we feel the need to grovel to ask our elected officials to do their jobs. I'll be grateful when the perpetrators are dragged off campus. Only a couple of days later, Columbia President Minouche Shafik sent a letter to the NYPD where she requested they remove the protesters, and that they remain on campus until May 17th. She would claim that it was due to safety concerns, but was that the truth? If she had really been opposed to the protest, she likely would have had them dispersed again after the first time on April 18th. Or is the reason that Shafik was likely pressured into asking for the NYPD to remove protesters with the risk of losing her position, like other Ivy League presidents who had been forced to resign, such as Harvard's Claudine Gay, Cornell University's Martha Pollack, and University of Pennsylvania's Liz McGill, due to pressure from wealthy donors, alumni, and baseless allegations of anti-Semitism. Which is exactly what was suggested in the chat.
She got pressed by the higher ups. They're like, yo,
could do anything to
get
pressure
these protesters off of my campus.
Former congressman and member of the chat, Chet Deutsch, CEO of the American Jewish Committee, would reply, sharing a PDF of a letter his organization has sent that day to Shafik telling her to shut these protests down, while he followed up with the chat saying, also in touch with the board, so NYPD can return. The day after, Mayor Adams made a statement in which he said, we went in and conducted an operation to remove those who have turned the peaceful protest into a place where anti-Semitism and anti-Israel attitudes were pervasive. Whilst nobody was harmed during these protests, there's also misinformation and perplexing allegations of anti-Semitism made when there were two major Jewish groups that put together the protests at Columbia University, If Not Now, which describes themselves as a movement of American Jews organizing our community to end U.S. support for Israel's apartheid system and demand equality, justice, and a thriving future for all Palestinians and Israelis. And Jewish Voice for Peace, an organization we had covered earlier due to their run-ins with Creative Community for Peace. If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace were both organizers of the protests at Columbia University and funded in part by Jewish billionaire and Democrat George Soros. When asked about what happened after the release of the Washington Post piece, Lubetsky, Loeb, and Sit were described as not having donated to the mayor by Adams' campaign lawyer, and confirmed that Blavatnik had sent a donation. Mayor Adams said, let's be very clear. Both times the NYPD entered Columbia University's campus on April 18th and April 30th were in response to specific written requests from Columbia University to do so. Prior to these operations, Mayor Adams consistently stated that Columbia is a private institution on private property and that assistance would be provided only upon request. Any suggestion that other considerations were involved in the decision-making process is completely false, and the insinuation that Jewish donors secretly plotted to influence government operations is an all too familiar anti-Semitic trope that the Washington Post should be ashamed to ask about, let alone normalize in print. This really quelled the protesting but would not stop the spread of these movements, nor change the sentiment that young people had of Israel. If anything, it pushed them even further away from support, with the only attack and danger happening across America having occurred at UCLA by pro-Israel counter-protesters that violently attacked the encampment, tearing down barricades, and assaulting protesters with metal pipes, pepper spray, and shooting fireworks into the encampment.
They got mortars out here.
Leading to dozens of injuries at a previously peaceful protest. One protester, Anna, said the police just watched as it happened. The police did nothing. They were coming at us with metal pipes. Numerous people went to the hospital because of how badly.
Yeah, the cops, they out here getting overrun. They got people out here.
One person left in a wheelchair. Another had their hand completely smashed. Members of the UCLA Radio News Department would corroborate this. As students were being relentlessly harassed by counter-protesters, the campus security and the University of California Police Department continued to watch and not engage. No efforts were made to protect the students of UCLA. Additionally, when LAPD and the California Highway Patrol were called to the scene, they did not intervene with the violent protesters for an hour. Idan On, an 18-year-old senior at Beverly Hills High School, was one of the pro-Israel attackers and was initially charged with suspicion of felony assault with a deadly weapon and bailed out before LA County refused to charge him for anything after he was caught on video recording attacking protesters and identified by his own mother, who was proud of his actions in a now deleted social media post where she circled him in a screen capture and wrote in Hebrew, Idan went to bully the Palestinian students in the tents at UCLA, before saying she and her husband were proud of what he did and that he would be headed to Israel to join the IDF. As we've clearly seen, the real reason the TikTok ban was rushed wasn't so much due to fear-mongering about China, despite the best efforts of individuals like Jacob Hellberg and his Silicon Valley associates trying to paint it that way. celebrating on Twitter with multiple photos of different people in Congress and government he worked with to pass the bill to ban TikTok, but the inability of the government and their lobbyists in controlling the pro-Israel narrative that the mainstream media has worked tirelessly to keep up for decades. The issue is that other social media platforms conduct themselves in the same manner. Facebook and Instagram were aggressively shadow banning, if not outright banning, certain content creators that would post anything supporting Palestine. A popular social media personality, Absorber, whose content consisted of him going on Omegle and reacting to Israelis' thoughts on Palestine, would have the reach on his account restricted and deal with multiple shadow bans despite his content not showing anything. Meanwhile, on TikTok, his account was flourishing without pause. Facebook has even recently announced that it would be removing any content that is deemed as hateful containing the word Zionist. Sabin, however, wouldn't be happy when Joe Biden said he would not supply bombs and artillery shells that Israel could use in an assault on Rafah in the Gaza Strip. The White House press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre would follow up, "What the president made clear on CNN is that we do not want to provide material support to such an operation. We have held a shipment of high payload, unguided munition, and we discussed with Israel all concerns about their use in dense urban environments." Sabin was furious. In an email to senior Biden aides divulged by Axios, read the following: "We, the U.S., as you stated numerous times, believe that Hamas should be defeated. We, the U.S., in this case you, Mr. President, have decided to stop sending munitions to Israel to achieve the goal that we/you have set up for Israel and ourselves. Even beyond Israel, this sends a terrible message to our allies in the region. And beyond that, we can flip from doing the right thing to bending to political pressure. Let's not forget that there are more Jewish voters who care about Israel than Muslims voters that care about Hamas. Bad, bad, bad decision on all levels. Please reconsider. Thank you. With respect, Han." This sounded more like someone that was telling the president what to do than someone who was giving suggestions. And the accusations that he was scripting the Biden administration's policy on Israel would only be strengthened with this leaked email, on top of the banning for TikTok happening only a week or two after he had been at the home of Sabin. Had this been any other billionaire that had reversed the ethnic groups that Sabin labeled in his email, they wouldn't suffer enough headlines of anti-Semitism, but while this was published on several publications, the titles wouldn't reflect that. Regardless, it does point out what we are after, which is that Haim Sabin is a very important, powerful figure that is central between the music industry, in particular Universal, and influence and policy for Joe Biden. In July, Benjamin Netanyahu had a visit to the USA where he spoke in front of Congress and received over 50 standing ovations, with clapping taking over 27% of his speech. The same Congress that pushed the bill to ban TikTok. Vice President Kamala Harris and 30 members of Congress, mostly Democrats, chose not to attend his address, whilst Elon Musk, owner of Twitter X, attended as a special guest of Netanyahu. One of the representatives that boycotted his speech, AOC, went on Twitter to say, "Just so we're clear, Netanyahu has lost so many people that he is addressing just a fraction of Congress. When this happens, they fill seats with non-members, just like what they do at award ceremonies, in order to project the appearance of full attendance and support." With Elon Musk replying, "The Democratic Party has become openly and boldly anti-Semitic." As absurd as his accusation of AOC and her party is, it only further illustrates the strong bias and lean that the owner of Twitter X has, as we also demonstrated Facebook and Instagram has, which we cannot find in TikTok, which strikes a problem for the powerful men like Sabin and others that want to control the narrative. That same month, Bill Ackman would announce his endorsement of Donald Trump. "I'm going to formally endorse real Donald Trump. I came to this decision some time ago, as many X followers have already understood from my supportive posts of Trump and my criticisms of Biden. Remember, media organizations are like sports teams that run plays chosen by their owners and executed by the coaches they hire. They are not unbiased arbiters of truth." The reason Ackman, Helberg, and many other billionaires and tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley that hated Trump for the past 8 years have switched their tune to supporting him with open arms is solely due to where he stands on the Israel issue. When he came to the campus protests, Trump would say, "One thing I do is, any student that protests, I throw them out the country. You know, there are a lot of foreign students. As soon as they hear that, they're going to behave," despite the majority of protesters being American citizens. And when speaking to donors privately in late May, he assured them that he would send that movement back 25 or 30 years, in reference to the potential of current students and professors who are protesting at college campuses holding positions of power in the government in the future.
Not saying that I'm going to be a protester.
At this point, the only major nation that expresses support for Israel is the United States, and of the countries that condemn their acts as war crimes are well over 150. With a vote in the United Nations General Assembly as early as last December, where these countries sought a ceasefire and argued that Israel was violating international law. The International Criminal Court, as well as the International Court of Justice, denounced what's happening, with the former issuing arrest warrants for both Netanyahu and the leader of Hamas. So what real reasons would UMG have to pull their catalog from TikTok in a historic failure of a move? Part of the reason for that could be money, like they stated, but from what we've seen, what is more likely is the bluff to pressure TikTok to change its policy to be more favorable to Israel. In the original statement, UMG had an interesting quote. It, in reference to TikTok, has offered no meaningful solutions to the rising tide of content adjacency issues, let alone the tidal wave of hate speech, bigotry, bullying, and harassment on the platform. If any of us have skimmed through Twitter or, God forbid, Instagram comments, we would all see that these platforms are far more hate, bigotry, bullying, and harassment in comparison to TikTok. Besides, when have terms of guidelines related to content ever mattered to the bottom line of a record label? It's in my belief that this was an attempt to strong-arm TikTok, and it failed. Bill Ackman, who was corresponding with Mayor Eric Adams, as well as one of the names in rumors of a TikTok purchase if it were forced to sell, and a major holder in UMG as well, would certainly benefit from TikTok's policy adjusted to censor criticism of a country he has allegiance to,
comments
as
are
well
like
as
a
Eugene Range,
minefield.
Haim Saban, David Renzer, and many others. Part of the issue is that most of UMG's shareholders, as well as the Dutch Stock Exchange, with its headquarters being in the Netherlands, don't have the same political leanings towards Israel that most older Americans would have. If anything, it's probably quite the opposite. The question that is left would be, if UMG pulled out for these reasons, knowing they would be sacrificing money, why would they go back to a deal with TikTok that was at best as good as the one they initially denied, or more likely less favorable since they lost a ton of leverage with their attempt at painting TikTok as this villain and UMG as the corporation fighting for artists being fairly compensated? On July 25th, UMG lost 25% of their stock value in a single day, and it was largely based on streaming revenue for Q2.
30% in one day.
9.6% year over year, which beat expectations. However, streaming revenue and subscription streaming revenue went up 6.9% year over year in Q2, but that fell short of what analysts were estimating, with their estimate being 11% growth. Our second quarter results reflect the varied performances of our diverse portfolio of DSP partners.
They're
The
short on
CFO of
growth,
UMG,
and
Boyd
they
Weir, point the
diminished
finger at
by
DSP, saying that they
30%.
weren't adopting enough paying subscribers whilst making sure to point out the platforms that
wasn't
were doing
making
well.
enough money.
While
They had
Spotify,
to
YouTube,
go
and
back
many
to
regional and
TikTok
local
and sign
platforms
that
have
deal.
continued to exhibit healthy growth in subscribers, other large partners who have been less successful in driving global adoption have seen a slowdown in new subscriber additions. Some of the reason a lot of these catalogs were being bought in the past 5 or so years was the estimates that subscription revenue would continue to increase at a certain rate. That's the bet they took. And here it's not looking so hot for
$41
UMG,
basic
even though they aren't one of the
subscription.
companies that relies on that business model. They're still using similar projections for what can be expected of their revenue that comes from streaming. What was worse though, and applies directly
Bro,
to
I don't know
we
what
covered
these
here
streaming
today,
companies
was
be thinking
ad-supported
they
streaming
who
revenue that
they
fell
think they are.
3.9%
But
year-over-year in that
$41
quarter,
for a
and this was
subscription is
entirely
absolutely
because of Meta
diabolical.
and TikTok. Meta pulled premium music videos from Facebook early in 2024 since it wasn't very popular with the users and was losing them money to license. Executives had to get on the call and let shareholders know that UMG missed over a month's worth of revenue from TikTok, which should be closer to 2, but nevertheless, it was due to them pulling out their catalog. So this is a directly calculable loss in money that UMG had because they wanted to pull their catalog from TikTok, and it's not even considering the incalculable
The
opportunity
loss of
cost
money was
of other
because
UMG
they
songs
pulled
that
out
may
of
have blown up
TikTok.
or gone viral in the time span that their catalogs were removed from TikTok. But it makes them look even stupider for the decision, which is why it's in my belief that they at best got the same exact deal from TikTok in January, or more likely a worse deal because they needed TikTok. Imagine if UMG
Get
had
scammed,
still not
buddy.
restored their music and gotten a deal with TikTok, how poorly these numbers just for ad-supported revenue would be on this earnings call. If it was 4% for just a month, imagine 3 or 4 months, God forbid in perpetuity like they tried to bluff that they would be down to do. And then imagine how it would look for the company's stock price when their biggest artists would start to speak out against them on public platforms. This is why UMG owes every single artist on their roster and the public an explanation. Kim Petras, who was the only artist to stand behind UMG, owes the public an explanation. What did UMG win for artists that they didn't get in the deal from January? What are the better terms or payments that artists can expect
I don't think
that
that
they
was
were
Pete
forced to
Sanchez.
keep their music off TikTok for 2
Must have been
months?
somebody else.
UMG was allowed to
I must
publicly
have heard
weaponize
the name
thousands
wrong.
of artists' careers as a bargaining chip with likely political aims which failed miserably. And when they went back to the deal they claimed they were fighting against, returned with nothing to show for it but an announcement that meant nothing to the countless artists, writers, and producers who were screwed by their decision.
Executive production.
So we followed up with other social media platforms that we are working with. We're also a trusted partner of TikTok, and we have been assured by TikTok off the record, I'll say off the record, that their policy is the same, meaning they would be treating Zionists in the same way. Okay, so I expect that off the record, you're going to actually be seeing statements about that in the coming days. On the record, I can tell you that we've been reassured by TikTok that they are looking at this statement by Meta and that
Reassured
they
by-
intend
they're being
to provide
reassured.
clarification to the public on it soon. Okay, and in terms of X, I mean, I really think at this point, genuinely, we all need to look at X and at Google and kind of say collectively, as both the Jewish community, but also professionals who are fighting hate and anti-Semitism today, this decision has been widely supported by all of the major Jewish organizations.
TikTok may have quietly agreed to adopt a censorship policy similar to Meta's, targeting criticisms of the Israeli government, a move that was strongly advocated by the Israeli nonprofit group Cyberwell. This development is part of a broader effort by Cyberwell, an organization deeply connected to Israeli intelligence operations, to suppress not only, quote, hate speech, but also political dissent against Israel. Cyberwell's influence has led to the banning of phrases like "from the river to the sea," "Palestine won't be free," and criticisms of Israel's military actions, including controversial practices like the Hannibal Directive. Meta's recent policy change that we spoke about earlier, driven by Cyberwell's lobbying, reclassified the term Zionist, marking it as potentially anti-Semitic and restricting its use in certain contexts. This change reflects a strategic push to equate criticism of Zionism with anti-Semitism, leveraging the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition to limit free speech. Cyberwell's leadership is not just comprised of ordinary activists, but includes figures with direct ties to Israeli state security. For example, Amos Yadlin, the former head of Israel's military intelligence, is a prominent figure in the organization. Tyler Cohen, Cyberwell CEO, regularly engages with U.S. security officials, including Meta's Dina Hussein and TikTok's Valiant Richie. They've appeared together at events like the Eradicate Hate Global Summit, which also featured U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and representative from the State Department's Global Engagement Center. Another significant figure associated with these efforts is Nathan Sharansky, who played a crucial role in the creation of the International definition of anti-Semitism. The IHRA definition has come under fire as an attempt to criminalize and suppress First Amendment protected speech critical of Israel and its occupation of Palestine. Pro-Israel lobbyists have pushed to encode the IHRA definition into hate crime statutes and official speech codes for hundreds of institutions, and have succeeded in advancing legislation on the state and federal level. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism includes, quote, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. If enacted, such a definition would mean that an American can call any government, including its own, racist, except for Israel. His involvement was a direct response to international criticism of Israel, such as the accusations of apartheid in the 2001 Durban Declaration and the BDS movement. Sharansky, along with Alan Dershowitz, contributed to a 2019 report that laid the groundwork for Cyberwell's current campaign to pressure social media platforms into adopting this redefinition. Cyberwell would flex that they were even able to censor truthful statements. In a piece that was written by Jock Paulson and Li Fang, two independent journalists, in January, Cyberwell reported that it had pushed to censor accounts that disputed the false allegation that Hamas had slaughtered thousands of babies during the October 7th attack. Any accounts disputing claims around babies killed during the attack, Cyberwell argued, are akin to content denying or distorting the Holocaust. President Joe Biden and leading Israeli figures have falsely claimed that Hamas beheaded or burned 40 babies during the assault into Israel. This claim has been widely debunked. Despite repeated false assertions to the contrary, only 2 infants were killed as a result of the assault, a 10-month-old child named Mila Cohen, who was killed at Kibbutz Berai, and Naamna Abu Rashad, who died 14 hours after an emergency birth after her mother, Abu Rashad, was shot by Hamas. In more recent months, Cyberwell has lobbied TikTok and Meta to censor social media posts with the phrase "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," claiming that the slogan constitutes hate speech. Cyberwell is attempting to reach beyond Meta and TikTok as they push for similar censorship policies on other platforms like X, formerly known as Twitter, and Google. This effort goes beyond addressing hate speech. It's about silencing dissent and shielding Israel from criticism. The entanglement of government pressure, corporate policy, and the redefinition of anti-Semitism poses a serious threat to free speech, particularly on issues related to Israel and Zionism. These actions are not random, but are part of a calculated strategy by organizations with deep ties to Israeli security, involving figures that we mentioned earlier. The agenda is relatively clear: to protect Israel from global scrutiny by manipulating platform policies under the guise of fighting hate. As these platforms bow to political and financial pressures, they risk becoming complicit in the suppression of free speech that many of them claim to uphold. Neither TikTok nor Cyberwell responded for comment to this article and leak
these people be
one of the members of Cyberwell made, saying that it was on the record when it was off the record. They weren't supposed to divulge this, and TikTok has not made a public statement or press release like Facebook/Meta did when they were pivoting to identifying what they believed to be certain hate speech that would be removed if it was using Zionist in a certain context. And to be completely fair to Facebook, Meta employees have been struggling with this. For instance, a quote saying Zionists are war criminals was forwarded to the oversight board, and Meta argued that the term Zionist could be used to refer to people on the basis of their nationality, and commentary about them may also refer to government or military actions. And they said they were looking forward to what the oversight board had to say, because there are certain contexts in which even Meta felt like this was overboard and suppressing speech. One of Cyberwell's board members, Adam Milstein, bragged that, quote, all content targeting Zionists with claims about running the world or controlling the media, plus more, will be removed. Will Elon Musk and X follow suit? And he was credited with Meta's recent decision to classify many criticisms of Zionists as hate speech. So it's clear who they're after next.
That was the biggest lie in the music industry ever told by Hello Yassine. Very interesting video. I think I just heard the most that I've ever heard about Israel-Palestine stuff in one sitting. That kind of gave me a headache, I can't even lie. But the original video link will be in the description. If you watched this far, I'm not gonna lie, you might as well sub. You just watched an hour and 41 minutes plus. My link is here too. I'm live, TwiiChy with 3 Ys. Come check me out.